Hey everybody, welcome back. So this is part two of our, hopefully I can make it just in three, but this is on the crisis of the Union. We're looking at 1850 to 1860, and in these couple of videos here, I want to just make it clear that what I'm trying to do is focus on connections first and chronology second. The videos that we're watching in class, I'm going to adjust this a little bit. Videos we're watching in class, I'll focus on chronology first, and that happens at the sake of making connections across time. So as we move across 1850 to 1860, through time, I want to make sure that we're identifying the things that really um, uh, have a significant effect on the things that happen later and the things that happen at this point. How did the things before have a significant effect on that? So we wanted to jump into, or where I left off on the last one was in the 1852 presidential election. And this one's pretty straightforward, right? We see two political parties. We see the Democratic Party, and my video here is hiding the Whigs, so I'm going to get rid of that there. Right, the Whig Party, General Winfield Scott was the candidate from the Whig Party, and you see he loses pretty handily there. He had a significant amount of popular votes though. He's a former general, and so generals are generally popular. Generals with the military background, especially one that had such success in the Mexican War, just a few years prior, we see them being pretty successful in presidential elections, especially in the 1800s. U.S. Grant, General Grant, after the Civil War, is a two-term president. So that's just an important point here. But in 1852, we see California's there, and the Democratic candidate Franklin Pierce wins North, South, East, and West. Pretty popular candidate from the Democratic Party. Uh, Pretty popular candidate, but goes on in history as being one of the worst presidents we've ever seen. And really, what I mean by that is, um, uh, he was a doughface. He was from New Hampshire, but he was pro-Southern, and that's what this means here. This term doughface. It means you're from the North, but you are favoring pro-Southern values. And so, as he was president, after he was elected, his policies are very distasteful to anybody in the North. And so, this will be the last time someone from the North, anybody in any state in the North, will elect or choose a Democratic candidate for president. So he serves from 1853 to 1857. And I have to remind you, so as we look back, this election comes at about the same time Uncle Tom's Cabin is written. And so at this time, again, making these connections, this book has a huge impact on the North. It pushes thousands, millions of Americans to recognize slavery as a moral evil when they hadn't considered that as such before. And so Franklin Pierce is governing our nation at the same time that people are recognizing slavery for really what it was. And so a lot of his lack of success is a result of that. Now he is also going to be president during these times when we have the KansasNebraska Act. Right, so he will be the sitting president when Charles Sumner gets beaten down by Preston Brooks. We'll look at that later. So this is his presidency. He was not renominated by his own party. He was such a failure. The Democrats will look to someone else in 1856. James Buchanan is the man they choose. So let's take a look at what some of the things that happened during his presidency. Now, this is a political cartoon that would come and be widely popular and circulated. This is the idea of forcing slavery down the throat of a free soiler. And I wanted to share this with you just for a little bit because we can see some things here. This guy tied down here is someone who doesn't want slavery to spread throughout the territories that exist. And so we see Kansas is the platform here, the Democratic platform, and these are the guys that are trying to force down this free soiler, and then over here are Southerners that are pushing slaves down the throat of someone who doesn't want to see slavery expand. It's kind of an interesting way to look at political cartoons from the 1850s. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act is one of the biggest, most significant features here, and one of the most important things you have to remember about this is that it essentially cancels out the Missouri Compromise, right? The Missouri Compromise line said that anything north of this line, right? Anything up here would have to be, would not allow slavery. Now, that didn't last. This created the opportunity for Kansas to become settled, and as it's settled, the people that are there get to decide, by popular sovereignty, they get to decide whether or not they want slavery. And so, what happens is Bleeding Kansas, right? It's a race, right? We have both pro-slavery figures coming from the southern states, as well as anti-slavery figures coming from the northern states, all rush in to Kansas because they want to make sure Kansas becomes the state that they want it to become, right? So border ruffians coming in from Missouri, right along the border of Missouri here, right? These border ruffians. And then the New England Immigrant Aid Society is something I wanted to spend a little bit of time on here. It doesn't come up in our textbook, it's not in the videos, but it's a neat way to look at it. Now Beecher, Harry Beecher Stowe is related to a man who is a large proponent of the New England Immigrant Aid Society. Now the idea here is New England immigrant is referring to people that are moving into Kansas, okay? And he wants to aid them so that way they can resist pro-slavery settlers, right? So Henry W. Beecher is a relative of Harriet Beecher Stowe, and this is something that was published in the New York Tribune, February 8th of 1856. It says Henry W. Beecher believed that the Sharps rifle was truly a moral agency. Right, Sharps rifle is a fantastic new and improved rifle. Does not require the full muzzle load and length of time that it takes to load old rifles. Shorter weapon, more versatile, more accurate because it's a rifled barrel as opposed to being a smooth bore barrel. So he believed that the Sharps rifle was truly a moral agency, and that there was more moral power in one of those instruments so far as the slaveholders of Kansas were concerned than in 100 Bibles. You might just as well read the Bible to buffaloes as to pro-slavery settlers, but they have a supreme respect for the logic that is embodied in the Sharps rifle. Right? And so as the story goes, the New England Immigrant Aid Society, and I spelled immigrant here, I'm sorry. The idea that people are moving from anti-slavery states into Kansas territory, that emigration or people moving, these are intended to support them. And so what he does is he ships thousands of rifles into Kansas, and on the boxes that they're being shipped in, they're labeled as Bibles. Right, getting them across the border or whatever. I don't know if there's a problem or an issue, but they were labeled as Bibles, and when they were opened, it was rifles. We have to go back to the previous notion of the abolitionist movement that in order to end slavery, what has to be done is we have to speak to the Christian soul of the slave owner and expose their sin, and in their conversion experience, they will liberate their slaves. And this preacher Beecher, if you want to do that, he kind of denounced that idea, right? He's maybe more like a John Brown. Right? So the sack of Lawrence is a significant event. Lawrence, Kansas is where pro-slavery settlers raid, burn, pillage, and destroy the town of Lawrence, Kansas, which was an anti-slavery town. This is an example of the violence that occurred. A few dozen people died in the sack of Lawrence, and this is where John Brown starts to get his infamy. Right, he's an abolitionist. We know that. And he's very famous for the Pottawatomie Creek Massacre, where he and his sons attacked some pro-slavery people who were involved in the sack of Lawrence, and he chops them. It was a massacre. It really, literally was. And his belief here is that nonviolence will not end slavery, right? We watch in the video how he confronts Frederick Douglass and says, how many people, have you converted? How many slave owners have you converted? How many slaves have you freed? Douglass doesn't really have an answer for that. There's no way for him to say, well, it's working. we're doing good, because they weren't. Right? And so John Brown, later on, will have this this portrait made of him. This is huge, in the Kansas Historical Societies, where I think this is. This is a very large mural that was painted between 1937 and 1941, called "Tragic Prelude." The idea that John Brown in Kansas is basically foreshadowing what will be the Civil War that will come later. Now, in Kansas, too far. In Kansas, what ends up happening is there are conflicting constitutions there, and Kansas does apply for statehood in 1856, and they apply first with this Topeka Constitution, right, which was an anti-slavery constitution based out of their capital in Topeka. Just a few miles down the road in Lecompton, right, they create a pro-slavery constitution, and lo and behold, Franklin Pierce denounces the Topeka Constitution as being insurrectionist, right? And he acknowledges the pro-slavery Constitution and encourages Congress to make Kansas as a slave state. Now, in the end, Kansas does not become a state, right? The idea of Kansas is up in the air right into the Civil War, right? Remember, our Congress is defunct because after the sack of Lawrence, after war breaks out, and war kind of continues through Kansas into 1860. There's nothing that goes on in these communities that is peaceful, because a number of them are close to each other, and one community could be anti-slavery, one community could be pro-slavery, and so we see battles going on and flaring up in Kansas, and that's really what makes Charles Sumner very, very angry. And so we spent a little bit of time on this last week, but he calls out, he attacks Andrew Butler. Is the guy that Senator Andrew Butler from South Carolina, and basically roasts him for being for being married to this dirty thing that slavery is. I don't know if you can hear that. What? So the idea there is that what did the five fingers say to the face? Hopefully oh gosh, what's his name now? Comedian, had a fantastic skit. But Andrew Butler has a nephew named Preston Brooks, who is a congressman from South Carolina. And 2 days after Sumner gives his speech, Brooks beats Sumner pretty thoroughly, and Sumner is basically left for dead on the Senate floor. And the Senate floor, the old Senate chambers, is kind of more or less a hallway now as you are in the Capitol building. When you go from the rotunda to the Senate, you will pass through the old Senate chambers, and I think there's a spot marked on the floor where this event occurred. But Brooks's defense was very, very fancily responded to. Now, I'm going to pause here before we get into the Republican Party. This event here did more to divide political figures than anything else, and it's the division of political figures that I want to go into next, going into the election of 1856, because we see the simplicity go away. There are at least 4 political parties at work in the 1850s, and well, there's actually 6, but 2 die, 4 are created, and 2 more die. It's a mess, and so I want to kind of spend the last video unfolding those things. But the KansasNebraska Act and the idea of bleeding Kansas as a significant set of events that makes it clear to people all over the United States that Congress isn't working. There is nothing that Congress can do. Why are we petitioning our representatives to do anything anymore? They're defunct, right? States are doing more on their own. Going back to the part one, the video that you probably hopefully just watched, we saw in that one that states are making their own personal liberty laws in response to the fugitive slave law of 1850, right? The new beefed up fugitive slave law. Um, these states are resisting that and making it clear that they're not going to do the dirty work and they're not going to allow kidnapping to occur. They're not going to give up the million free blacks living in the North to the South. They're not going to stand for that. And so at the end of this video here, I leave you with the idea, this notion that Congress clearly is and not an unoperable thing, right? People look to the president for help. And we have a presidential election in 1856. A new president will take over in 1857. Can that individual guide the United States towards unity? So that's where we end. Adios.